Lee Cain, first of all, you advised Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak is now being advised, apparently, to do something a bit more because the kind of generalised approach so far doesn't seem to be working, if you look at the polls anyway. So do you think that going for the jugular is a Sunak-esque thing, and would it make any difference?
I think what it tells us at this point is the party itself believes the strategy that they're pursuing isn't working. So you have that panic where everybody becomes a strategist and tries to come up with an idea that might start to change the polls. I think when the research that we've done at Charlesby this weekend, some of the polling, you can see that one of the big problems is people aren't worried about Keir Starmer. Most people's motivation in voting this election is to remove the Conservatives from power. That's the driving desire for most people. That's what they're voting for. When you ask them what they think of Keir Starmer, the top word that people would use to describe him is boring. So there's a problem for Labour further down the line on a sort of enthusiasm deficit. Nobody's excited by them. Nobody's voting for them. But for the Tories, the idea that they can sort of change how people perceive Keir Starmer into some sort of big political threat, I think is unlikely. The research is clearly sort of pointing towards, when you give a lot of what's they're putting out on the air war, the research is probably pointing to the fact that the attacks on tax is probably you would assume, considering how much they're punching that bruise, that's probably having the most impact in the focus groups and in the polling. So I suspect that would probably be a more sensible position to sustain at this point, as opposed to flip-flopping from different message and different strategy consistently.
Claire, what do you make of this idea then of kind of it becoming more personal? Because we know, I mean, I don't know if it's come from Keir Starmer or whether it's come maybe more from Labour, but we know the personal stuff about Rishi Sunak that comes from Labour is that he can't really relate. He's not relatable. He's not, he's someone who has a lot of money. He perhaps isn't able to relate on many kind of household decisions that people make. Do you think is it useful? Is it a good idea at this point for anyone to get personal on either side, or does it work?
I think it only really works if it already resonates with what voters are thinking themselves. And I think I actually haven't seen that many direct Labour attacks more recently on Sunak in terms of his personal relatability. What I've seen is those comments being made, but in the voices of voters themselves. So even that first question that he got on the first kind of leaders debate about the woman who was saying, look, I'm batch cooking because I can't afford to cook up every day of the week. It wasn't a direct attack on Sunak, but it's those kinds of comments that I think do really resonate for people. I don't think at this stage of the game it would look anything other than pretty desperate if they went very obviously from leader to leader. The attacks have been on Starmer for quite a long time. They've been dropping kind of negative stories about him all the way through. At this point, it doesn't really feel like people are listening to what the Conservative spokespeople are saying anymore. And therefore, I think there's a risk for them that it backfires. But I agree, they've got a real dilemma now when they're facing the kind of polling they are about how do they have a strategy that can, probably it's about now for them about motivating their own support not to stay at home.
What do you make of a government minister, defence secretary no less, coming on 2 weeks in succession now and saying, basically saying, conceding the election, really? I mean, he probably wouldn't accept that, but that's what it sounded like. Last week he was saying, you know what we need to really focus on? We need to focus on how many MPs Labour are going to get, how big their majority is going to be. Implicit in that is that they're going to win. This week he's saying, I'm a realist. It's not the most likely outcome that we're going to win, but hey, anything is possible. Do you have to keep bluffing in politics? And I know we talk about honesty a lot, but they're trying to do something. Maybe they're not trying to win an election anymore, Claire. Maybe they're just trying to limit the damage. But what do you make of Grant Shapps being quite honest about this stuff and saying, well, it is what it is?
I thought it was pretty extraordinary. And obviously, I'm not advising the Conservatives on how they should win an election. But it seemed to me that the narrative that they did have about the economy, and the decisions that they'd taken, and then going for Labour on the tax attacks seemed to be the most fruitful and consistent approach. This approach of now basically saying, look, we're lost, it's just about how big we lose, seems extraordinary. I don't see why anyone's going to be motivated to do that. I assume it's because they are worried about how many of their supporters are staying at home. Like, we're picking that up on the doors as well, that there are lots of Conservatives who just are not going to turn out to vote for them this time, even if they won't vote Labour. That seems to me to be the message that they're targeting. But I also wonder about how much is already happening about jostling for position post-election, which seems to me to be pretty unforgivable in terms of party loyalty. But yeah, I'll be interested to see what Lee thinks about what their strategy is. But I think it's about motivating people who are not wanting to vote at all, who would otherwise be voting Tory.
That's interesting. Lee, I mean, on that point, I'd be interested to know what your answer is. Does this strategy work? Who's it work for? But also, in Boris Johnson's day, he wouldn't have let Grant Shapps go on the radio and say anything like this, would he?
Well, I think the team,
you would know.
Yeah, the team around wouldn't have, I think, particularly called this strategy, and would have been somewhat displeased, I think, if we were had ministers conceding. But you would assume that, as a member of the cabinet, Grant is acting on the orders of the campaign. Now, last week when he talked about the supermajority, the strategy for inside CCHQ is that, we know the postal votes are landing on, in people's letterboxes, so that, the belief is that actually to try and concern people of a Keir Starmer premiership and, try and say, well, hang on, we don't want to give him this supermajority and he can do what he wants, and try and worry some of those stay-at-homers to cast their vote. But I think it's a misguided strategy, because if you tell people, hey, you're backing a loser, you're on the losing side, it actually only serves to depress your actual vote share. In the referendum, one of the strategies that we deployed was to tell people correctly that Remain voters were less likely to vote, because we knew by pushing that message, we were actually helping to depress the Remain vote. So there's a psychology at play there that I think the Conservatives have probably misread at this point.
I just think that somewhere I think the message has just got confused, because Grant Shapps said this morning, we're fighting for every seat. And then at the same time, but we're also warning about an unchecked majority. And I don't quite understand how the two of those, how can people cope with two messages at once? I mean, I know I can't. I mean, they seem to contradict.
Well, I think this is all part of the point. It's about message discipline. So is some of this the orders of CCHQ? Is some of it cabinet ministers feeling the licence to slightly freestyle and think of the seats? I mean, we had Grant talking last week about the supermajority, and the day after, David Cameron sort of walked back from that particular strategy. So again, you've got different cabinet ministers with slightly different messages, which is always a very, very troubling sign.
Did he though? Did he? Because remember, you said to him, Stig, you said, "Can you win?" And he said, "Anything is possible." Yeah. That's not very convincing.
I just wonder if the fact here is just about being depressed. I just wonder that if it's your life and your job, I mean, you know this, Lee, and you've seen the very depths of how government can fall and rise. You've seen successes and failures. I just wonder if you come out and get asked by an annoying person and asthma for 8 minutes, this looks awful, this looks awful, this looks awful, and it does look awful, and the polls have been absolutely in the toilet for a year, and there is just no way with any degree of common sense or honesty you can reflect anything but how awful things are. Are you just going to say it? Are you just going to say, yeah, we're probably not going to win? We're screwed, because they must feel that.
But there's an element of professionalism. Okay. So there's two different things here. If within CCHQ they think there is a strategy, we have done the polling and the focus groups and all those other things, and we are finding within that this is motivating the base that we need to come out and vote when they may otherwise stay at home. That is a particular strategy, in which case go out and push the message. I personally don't think actually that's how the psychology of this works, but that's obviously very different to a Grant Shapps coming up and just saying, I think we're throwing in the towel, and trying to be honest. I think it's all part of a strategy. Whether it's the right one is the question.
But just finally on this, we've got 17 days to go. I'm not sure what they're going to say for the next 7. I'm not sure I can take it.
Day 9.
What are they going to say next, Lee?
I just have Grant in the corner waving a white flag and hoping it all ends. I don't know anymore.
I'm just not sure where they go, really.
And